and they go towards the town talking. And many ask Stephen and Hermas, who has joined them, many questions, as they are both placed in a very favourable light in the eyes of the Israelites, because they are Gamaliel's dearest pupils. Many ask, but what does Gamaliel say about him? And some, did he send you? And some, did he not regret losing you? Or, what does the Master say of the great Rabbi? The two disciples reply patiently. Gamaliel speaks of Jesus of Nazareth as of the greatest man in Israel. What? Greater than Moses? Exclaim some, who are almost scandalized. He says that Moses is one of the many precursors of the Christ, but he is only a servant of the Christ. So, according to Gamaliel, this man is the Christ. Is that what he says? If Rabbi Gamaliel says that, the matter is settled. He is the Christ. He does not say that. He cannot yet believe that, unfortunately for him. But he says that the Christ is on the earth, because he spoke to him many years ago. Both he and the wise Hillel. And he's waiting for the sign that Christ promised him, so that he may recognize him, says Hermas. Again, a pause. You might be wondering, who is this that Gamaliel saw many years ago? Well, it so happens, and I'll read this vision one of these days. We know, we pray this in the Rosary, and it's in St. Luke's Gospel, Jesus is found in the temple after being searched for by Mary and Joseph. And this is the fifth joyful mystery in the Rosary. And Mary briefly speaks to Jesus, and he responds in a strange way. Almost seems as if he's putting her in her place, because he must be about his father's business. Of course, he's just clarifying a certain thing that she, in her human motherliness, needs to understand about him. He's not entirely hers. Now, this scenario is amplified in Maria Valtorta's writings, and we see that the great Rabbi Gamaliel, obviously 20 years younger at this point, and Hillel, who is much older than Gamaliel, but is still on the earth alive, is there, and both have, Hillel is with his faction, but Shammai is, and this is known in Jewish history, Shammai was of a school that was opposed in some ways to Hillel's. And we see a great respect for Hillel by Jesus in the poem of the man God. And he is seen to have a teaching which is closer to that of Jesus than Shammai's school had. But Gamaliel is a disciple of Hillel, not of Shammai. And when Jesus is speaking, and there's a lot Jesus says, particularly pertaining to chapter 9 of the prophecy of Daniel about the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Shammai is hostile to Jesus, and Hillel is much more open to listening. This is the boy, and Gamaliel is there listening. And that's the instance that Gamaliel is talking about 2 decades prior to the time of the public ministry of Jesus. But how could he believe that that man was the Christ? What did he do? I am as old as Gamaliel, but I never heard of anyone doing the things that the Master does. If he is not convinced by these miracles, what miracles did he see in that Christ that he believed in him? He saw him anointed with the wisdom of God. So he says, replies Hermas once again. Well then, what is this one, according to Gamaliel? The greatest man, master, and precursor in Israel. If he could say he is the Christ, the wise and just soul of my first master would be saved, says Stephen. And he concludes, and I pray that that may happen at all costs. But if he does not believe that he is the Christ, why did he send you to him? We wanted to come. He let us come, saying that it was a good thing. Perhaps he wanted to find out things and report them to the Sanhedrin, insinuates one. Man, what are you saying? Gamaliel is honest. He does not play the spy for anybody, and particularly for the enemies of an innocent person, objects Stephen. And he is so indignant and almost beaming with holy indignation that he looks like an archangel. But he must have been sorry to lose you, states another man. He was and was not. As a man who was fond of us, yes. As a very righteous spirit, no. Because he said, he is greater than I am, and younger than I am. So I will be able to breathe my last peacefully, as far as your future is concerned, as I know that you are with the Master of Masters. And what does Jesus of Nazareth say of the great Rabbi? Oh, he speaks but highly of him. Is he not envious of him? God does not envy, replies Hermas severely. Do not make sacrilegious suppositions. So he is God, according to you. Are you sure? And the two reply together, as we are sure that we are alive just now. And Stephen concludes, and believe it yourselves if you wish to possess eternal life. It's worth pausing there. That would seem to be an oddity, that one could say that Jesus is God and these guys don't say that is blasphemy, that is ridiculous. But if you've seen some of my other videos, especially the ones at Hyde Park where I go into some of the scenes in the Old Testament where we hear again and again of the angel of the Lord. Start again. Where I go. Start again. But if you've watched some of my previous videos, particularly those where I'm in Hyde Park and I'm describing the scenes from the Old Testament where the angel of the Lord appears, and he is not just an angel, but he is God himself, manifesting in human form. And then, if you go to Genesis chapter 19, I think, where God, well, as we can say, 3 angels come to Abraham, who's sitting at the oak of Mamre. And there, it transpires, it emerges from the text that one of those angels is God himself. So the idea that God would appear on earth is not at all foreign to Hebrews, to Israelites of the Old Testament period. And of course, although we'd say this is the New Testament period, the Old Testament period is just next door neighbour of the New Testament period. These are the same people, same belief system, same framework. They know the Old Testament and they know that God appears to people. And he takes human form and he eats with them as God did in the presence of Abraham. So that's why there's no astonishment at the thought that Jesus may well be God. The coming of God to the earth in human form is not at all unusual. Of course, it's unusual for Jews of today, but they're not, in my view and in the view of the church traditionally, they can use the name Jew, and they may even have an absolute ethnic identity with the Hebrews of the Old Testament, but I don't believe that's so. But even if it was so, being ethnically one with a previous people and bearing a name that's the same as a previous people does not make you the same as them in your religious belief. Rabbinic Judaism is entirely different from the Judaism of the Old Testament. Of course, we know that in the sense of there's no longer a temple. So there can no longer be the sacrifices, which were the centre of their system, their cult, their religion. Cult not in a negative sense. And so no matter what a Jewish person says to you today, that God can't appear as man, and that there can be only one person in one God, to put it in its modern terminology, or its Catholic terminology, that's simply wrong from the Old Testament. In fact, going back to Genesis 19, we find that God calls fire from heaven upon Sodom and Gomorrah from God who is in heaven. And the God who is doing the calling is the God who is on earth. So we posit two gods, but no, we don't, because both are addressed as God, and the whole Hebrew Bible is about affirming the oneness of God. But it's clearly oneness, not in the simple Unitarian manner of a modern Jew or a Muslim. It is a complex unity. And I focused on Jews, modern Jews, but the same problem with Muslims. They've basically misunderstood the Old Testament, and in fact that their version of the truth is not based upon Hebrew belief. The Islamic view of the truth is based upon an evolving set of religious beliefs that came out of Jewish and Christian heresy in the 7th century AD and evolved until it became rigidly what it is today, the religion of Islam in all its forms, approximately 200 years later, 200 years after the death of Muhammad, whoever Muhammad was. And so their religion, with its particular viewpoint, is partly, as you can see if you read the Quran, a reaction against Trinitarian beliefs. So it's developed in a opposition to Catholicism, principally in a direct sense the Catholicism of the Eastern Roman Empire, with which the emerging Arab power, which was just basically monotheistic kind of religion, Unitarian religion, that at that stage, that conflict with the Byzantine power was a conflict with Trinitarian ideology, and so they were shaping their religion as the decades and the centuries went on in that context. Jews shaped their religion post the destruction of Jerusalem at its temple in that context. So they both come to a kind of rejection of Trinitarianism from different perspectives, from different false suppositions. Anyhow, that's a long way of saying that don't be surprised if a first century Jew does not fall over when somebody says, I believe that man is God.